Well, the third wave is turning out to be the worst wave. New restrictions even hitting once protected provinces like Nova Scotia. Ontario, though, has been hit hardest. The response there has also been the most controversial and the most confusing. Restrictions on playgrounds, new powers for police, all quickly rolled back by Premier Doug Ford, who tearfully apologized for making mistakes. He also did a 180 on paid sick leave, something he opposed since he's been elected. He'd canceled a paid sick leave program in that province. Now he says he's got a plan. Meanwhile, the federal government has shut down flights from India and Pakistan for 30 days due to the new Indian variant of COVID-19. But is that too little too late? Will the vaccine rollout, more than 14 million vaccines are now in Canada, ever catch up to the variants? Let's find out. The Scrum is back. Joyce Napier, the CTV News Ottawa Bureau Chief, is here. Robert Benzie, the Toronto Star's Queen's Park Bureau Chief, is here. And our special guest today in this round is the CTV News infectious disease specialist, Dr. Abdu Sharkawy. Great to have all of you on the program. Dr. Sharkawy, let me just start with you. Restrictions in Ontario, I know they went back and forth, as I just mentioned, but the Premier apologized and he's promising to get this right. Are these enough to flatten the curve, or are there still things they need to do?
No, I think we have to refine this even further. I'm glad that there was a realization that it's important to keep outdoor activities alive when it comes to social, mental, physical well-being. But let's not forget about the business sector as well. It's important for our economic survival and small businesses to be able to thrive as well. And I think that we should be able to open up some businesses if curbside pickup is a possibility, especially if they are essential goods that are being delivered from those establishments. We need to make sure that whatever we're doing is evidence-based, is science-based, and is not based on any form of political whim or pressure. And unfortunately, that seems to be the guiding theme through much of this pandemic.
Yeah, he has not shortened the list of essential work, Robert Benzie. Let me just quickly go to paid sick leave. BC had a budget last week. They didn't put in paid sick leave. I don't think 9 provinces have it. I know there's a federal program, but Doug Ford has flipped on that. What do they now plan to do on paid sick leave, if anything, in the short term?
Well, Evan, they're planning to bolster the federal program that pays $450 a week after taxes. It's a complicated program to access. Workers don't get paid right away, sometimes waiting 3 days, 4 days. And the kind of people who have jobs that they don't have paid sick leave need money right away. They don't have a lot of savings sometimes. And this is something that the Ontario government is coming to that realization. They've taken a huge political hit, and it is a major flip-flop because remember, Ontario had a paid sick leave program until 2018 when Doug Ford's Conservatives defeated Kathleen Wynne's Liberals, and then they got rid of it. They haven't brought in an emergency one during the pandemic. There've been a lot of pressure from the NDP, from the Liberals, from the Greens to do that. Business communities, the labor unions and others have said you should really do this, but they've resisted until now when they had this disastrous press conference on April 16th, the walk back on April 17th, and then Doug Ford's tearful press conference in his mother's house where he's in isolation under quarantine. It's like a cinematic week for Ford, really. And now this backtrack, this flip-flop, this U-turn that on paid sick leave, which they have to do because the doctors say, look, it will keep people from going to work sick.
Yeah, that's been one vector. So in the middle of that kind of shambolic week of back and forth, Joyce, actually Doug Ford and the Premier of Quebec, Premier Legault, demanded that the federal government lock down the borders, and then they finally did. Aaron O'Toole asked the same thing. So the federal government announced, no more flights from Pakistan and India for 30 days because of the variant there. Too little, too late on borders. People had asked that about the variants for months.
Well, clearly, I mean, we knew, for instance, at Christmas that people would be traveling. We also know something, and we've put these people on the air. They come back from abroad, but instead of coming and landing in Canada in one of the Canadian airports where they have to go through those 3 days in a federal hotel and all those restrictions, they land somewhere close to the border in the U.S. and then travel by car and cross the border where there are not the same restrictions. I mean, that was sort of like a huge open wound. And we know that most of the travelers are Canadians that come back to Canada. That is the majority of travelers. Closing it to India is a good idea. But when the federal government says we have some of the strictest restrictions, actually no, because I read other papers and other countries have had very strict restrictions and have reacted sooner.
Okay, so just picking up from what Joyce said, Dr. Sharkawy, how concerned are you about the variant? And are measures like closing borders or shutting down some flights enough?
Well, I don't think they are enough. And I think that they're not enough, not only in principle in terms of how widely it's applied, but the scale as well. We have to recognize that global travel is something that goes through many of these highly endemic countries at this point in time. I'm glad that the federal government put in an extra policy measure in terms of the test through any connecting flight prior to coming into Canada through any of these places. But we've got to apply this broadly. When we look at true success stories like in Australia, you've got to shut down all international travel until this settles down. And when we talk about people getting through this or skirting the policy, there are people going through land borders. We've got to make sure that our border across the U.S. is better controlled and screening restrictions. And frankly, even within Canada, we've got a P1 variant that's raging through much of British Columbia. Anybody can get on a plane right now from Vancouver and fly to Toronto, potentially carrying the P1 variant through the plane and into the community here in Toronto, and no one is the wiser. So that has to change. We've got to have consistency across all jurisdictions, across all borders.